Reading a surprising statement at the White House on Thursday afternoon, First Lady Melania Trump denied having ties to Jeffrey Epstein or any knowledge of his crimes.
The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. I have never had any knowledge of Epstein's abuse of his victims. I was never involved in any capacity. I was not a participant, was never on Epstein's plane, and never visited his private island.
Hey friends, welcome back to State Line Media. So let us get started. Melania Trump spent decades carefully constructing the official love story, the fairy tale romance, the glamorous New York meeting, the memoir, the interviews. It became family mythology. And then, completely out of nowhere, the ground shifted beneath her feet. A massive dump of federal Epstein files dropped into the public record, and buried deep inside those files, hidden among hundreds of pages of investigative documents, is an FBI record. And inside that FBI record is an account from a former Epstein assistant, someone who spoke to federal agents under penalty of perjury, someone who would face criminal charges if they were caught lying to investigators.
I never had a relationship with Epstein or his accomplice, Maxwell. My email reply to Maxwell cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence. My polite reply to her email doesn't amount to anything more than a trivial note. I am not Epstein's victim. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump. I met my husband by chance at a New York City party in 1998.
That person told the FBI that Jeffrey Epstein introduced you to your husband. Not a gossip columnist making things up, not a tabloid reporter chasing a headline, but an FBI document, a federal record, a sworn statement given to law enforcement officials who were building a case against one of the most notorious sex traffickers in American history. And then, as if that was not damaging enough, emails surfaced. Emails showing you writing warm, friendly messages to Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who would later be convicted on federal sex trafficking charges and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Emails where you signed off with the words, "Love, Melania." Suddenly, the carefully constructed love story starts to look a whole lot more complicated than anyone in Trump world is comfortable admitting publicly.
At the time, I had never met Epstein and had no knowledge of his criminal undertakings. Numerous fake images and statements about Epstein and me have been circulating on social media for years now. Be cautious about what you believe. These images and stories are completely false. I'm not a witness or a named witness in connection with any of Epstein's crimes.
The fairy tale has a crack in it, and that crack is not going away. What I just described is exactly what happened and the fallout from it. I was never involved in any capacity. I was not a participant, was never on Epstein's plane, and never visited his private island. I have never been legally accused or convicted of a crime in connection with Epstein's sex trafficking, abuse of minors, and other repulsive behavior. The false smears about me from mean-spirited and politically motivated individuals and entities looking to cause damage to my good name, to gain financially and climb politically, must stop. My attorneys and I have fought these unfounded and baseless lies with success and will continue to maintain my sound reputation without hesitation. Has been one of the most chaotic and damaging image crises the Trump White House has had to manage since they moved back into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Because this is not a story about policy disagreements or legislative battles. This is not about tariffs or trade wars or Senate confirmation fights. This is a story that cuts directly through the heart of something the Trump brand has always depended on, the personal loyalty narrative, the family image. The idea that whatever you think about Donald Trump's politics or his personality or his policies, he is a man who built an empire, married a beautiful woman, and projects a certain kind of strength and success that his base finds deeply appealing and authentic. And now that image has a fracture in it, a fracture that was not created by political opponents making things up out of thin air.
That was First Lady Melania Trump making a major announcement from the White House moments ago. As you were just listening there, denying any ties. The late disgraced sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, the First Lady also calling on Congress to provide Epstein's victims with a public hearing, saying Epstein, quote, was not alone. She talked about the fact that she had no ties to Jeffrey Epstein, was not introduced to her husband, now President Donald Trump, by Jeffrey Epstein, never traveled on his plane.
Not created by disgruntled former employees seeking revenge, not created by anonymous sources with hidden agendas. This fracture was created by federal documents that were quietly sitting in a courthouse gathering dust until the Epstein file releases blew the doors open and let the whole world see what was hiding inside. And what was hiding inside was enough to send Trump world into full damage control mode almost immediately, with lawyers, threats, public statements, and a level of panic that you rarely see from an operation that usually projects such confident control over its public image.
The direct impetus, other than that we've been told that this was something that has been on the First Lady's mind for some time, and that she had decided to speak out directly on it herself. The White House was not aware of the contents of these remarks, or at least White House staffers that we've been in touch with did not expect to hear this from the First Lady today. We knew that these remarks would be personal in nature, but the topic was kept a closely guarded secret until the moment that Melania Trump started speaking. It is extraordinary in that in these comments calling for justice for survivors, an opportunity to have their stories told on the congressional record.
The response from Melania and the people around her has been equally dramatic and in some ways even more revealing than the documents themselves. Legal threats flying everywhere. A rare, clearly prepared public statement from the First Lady herself, something she almost never does voluntarily. Lawyers sending letters threatening billion-dollar lawsuits against anyone who repeated the claim publicly. A full-scale PR operation working around the clock to push back against the story before it could get any bigger or spread any further. And here's the thing about that kind of aggressive response. The more forcefully you push back, the more the story tends to stay alive. That is just how these things work in the modern media environment.
And defending her own reputation, she has breathed new life into a story that this White House has been desperate to turn away from for months. Frustrated at every turn, by the way, in which it continued to dominate the news cycle. Now you have the First Lady of the United States, who almost never speaks publicly on issues of this sort, doing exactly that with this blunt daytime address.
Garrett, we've seen her in an image standing alongside Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Donald Trump at the time. She referred to meeting him at a party in the early 2000s. There's the image up on your screens now. She's been mentioned in the Epstein files just over 100 times or so. But of course, that does not mean any kind of criminal wrongdoing being mentioned in those files. Important to note that.
When you threaten to sue everyone who mentions something, people start asking why you are so scared of the question in the first place. The aggression of the response becomes part of the story, and once it becomes part of the story, you have lost control of the narrative in a way that is very difficult to recover from. So let us walk through exactly what is in these files, what Melania said about it, who she threatened to sue, what the broader Epstein and Maxwell connections actually look like when you lay them all out end to end, and why this whole situation matters beyond just the personal drama, because the political implications of this story are a lot bigger than most people are giving it credit for right now. Stay with me because this one goes deep, and by the time we are done, you are going to understand exactly why the Trump White House is scrambling behind closed doors. Let us actually get into what is in these files, because I think a lot of people have seen the headlines floating around but have not fully connected all the dots yet. And when you lay it all out in order, when you see the timeline of what was released, what was said, how each piece connects to the next, and how the Trump side responded at each stage, the full picture is significantly more uncomfortable than any single piece of coverage has managed to capture on its own. So let us go through this carefully and make sure you have the complete story. Here is where this starts. A significant release of Epstein-related federal documents became public. These were files connected to the long-running federal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and the network of people around him, including Ghislaine Maxwell. The release included FBI interview records, internal investigative documents, and communications that had previously been sealed or unavailable to anyone outside the legal proceedings. And buried inside that release was a specific and very significant claim. A former Epstein assistant told the FBI in an interview that Epstein introduced Donald Trump to his wife, Melania. That is the core of it. That is the detail that has caused all of this chaos. And the detail that makes it particularly difficult to simply dismiss and move on from is the legal context in which it was made. This was not someone posting anonymously on social media from a fake account. This was not a source whispering to a reporter off the record with no accountability. This was a statement made directly to federal agents and federal prosecutors under penalty of perjury, meaning the person making the statement was legally exposed and criminally liable if they were found to be lying to federal investigators. That does not automatically make the claim true. Witness accounts can be wrong, mistaken, or incomplete even when made under oath. Memory is imperfect. People misremember things. But it absolutely means the claim cannot be waved away as invented gossip with no foundation whatsoever. It is in a federal document. It was said to the FBI in a formal investigative context, and now it is part of the public record in a way that is not going away no matter how many legal threats get sent out. Now, Melania and Trump have told their own origin story many times over the years. The version they have consistently promoted is that they met at a party in New York, a story that has been repeated in interviews and profiles across major publications and in Melania's own memoir. The Epstein-linked account in the FBI files directly contradicts that version of events, or at minimum complicates it significantly by suggesting that the connection between them may have run through Epstein's social circle in a way that neither of them has ever publicly acknowledged. And that distinction matters not just for the historical accuracy of a celebrity love story, but because it places the beginnings of their relationship inside the same world that Epstein and Maxwell were operating in during that period. The same world that federal prosecutors spent years documenting as a network built around the exploitation and trafficking of young women. Even if Melania had zero knowledge of or involvement in any of Epstein's actual crimes, even if her connection to that world was purely social and completely innocent, the association is politically and reputationally toxic in a way that Trump world clearly understands on a very deep level, which is exactly why the response has been so fast, so aggressive, and so expensive. Because in the world of political image management, perception often matters more than reality. And the perception of being connected to Epstein and Maxwell is a poison that no amount of legal maneuvering can fully wash away. And then there are the emails. A detailed breakdown of the released Epstein files highlighted an email from years ago, a point in time when Melania and Trump were already in a serious relationship. In that email, Melania wrote to Ghislaine Maxwell, opening with the words, "Dear G," and closing with love, Melania. Maxwell responded affectionately, calling her Sweet P. Now, people can and will argue about what a friendly email signature actually means in terms of the depth of a relationship. People sign emails with love all the time without being genuinely close to the recipient. That is a fair point and worth acknowledging. But the optics of it, Melania Trump exchanging warm, personally affectionate correspondence with the woman who was later convicted of federal sex trafficking charges, those optics are genuinely very difficult to manage from a communication standpoint because it places Melania in a social context with Maxwell that is much warmer and more personal than the Trump side has ever admitted. And it raises obvious and uncomfortable questions about how well Melania actually knew the people in Epstein's inner circle, questions that her public statements have consistently worked to shut down entirely rather than answer directly and transparently. So what was the response from Trump world? Because this is where it gets really instructive. Before the full file dump had even landed, Melania's lawyers were already sending legal threats over this exact topic. Reports emerged that Melania's legal team threatened to sue someone for an enormous sum of money after he publicly claimed that Epstein introduced her to Trump. The lawyers called his remarks untrue, derogatory, defamatory, and incendiary. That is an extraordinary and almost unprecedented number for a defamation threat, and it signals just how seriously and how urgently the Trump side is treating any public suggestion that their origin story runs through Epstein, because you do not threaten a lawsuit of that magnitude over something you consider a minor nuisance or a claim you are genuinely confident will collapse on its own. You do that when you are genuinely frightened of what happens if the claim gets traction and starts to feel normal to people who are hearing it for the first time. The size of the number is itself a message. It is designed to intimidate. It is designed to make anyone else thinking about repeating the claim calculate the financial risk before they open their mouth. It is a strategic use of legal threat as a communication tool. And it tells you a great deal about how the Trump side is thinking about this story and how much they fear it. They are not treating this as a minor annoyance. They are treating it as an existential threat to the carefully crafted public image they have spent years building. And then after the files dropped and the story went truly viral across social media and YouTube and mainstream news coverage, Melania went further. She gave a rare public statement on camera, clearly prepared and clearly delivered with controlled fury. She said she had no ties to Epstein. She said she had never been on his plane or his island. She said that the falsehoods connecting her to the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein must cease immediately, calling the stories malicious attempts to tarnish her reputation. That is unusually strong and unusually public language from someone who has historically preferred to operate at a significant remove from political controversies and let other people do the talking on her behalf. The fact that she felt it necessary to make that statement, to go on camera herself and address this directly rather than letting the legal team handle it quietly behind the scenes, tells you something important about how badly the story was cutting through with audiences that the Trump side cares about. You do not bring out the First Lady for a prepared on-camera denial unless the internal polling and the media monitoring are telling you that the story is doing real damage that the standard PR tools cannot contain. Now let us put all of this in the broader context it belongs in, because this story connects to several bigger threads that go well beyond Melania personally, and that help explain why it has the kind of staying power that it does. The first is the broader Trump-Epstein relationship, which has its own complicated history that predates all of the file releases by decades. Trump and Epstein were photographed together at Mar-a-Lago. Trump once publicly said that Epstein likes beautiful women as much as I do and that many of them are on the younger side. That quote has followed him through multiple political cycles. Both Trumps have consistently insisted they knew nothing about Epstein's crimes and that their social connection to him was superficial and ended years before his arrest. But the Epstein files, as they have been released in pieces over time, keep producing new details that complicate that narrative in ways that are hard to fully manage. Not necessarily details that prove any wrongdoing on Trump's part, but details that make the claim of distance and ignorance harder to deliver with full credibility. And every new detail that complicates that claim keeps Epstein's name tied to Trump world in the public consciousness, which is politically damaging in ways that compound over time and do not simply fade away with a denial and a legal threat. The second thread worth pulling on is the FBI angle, and this one has a genuinely striking irony to it that critics are not going to let go of anytime soon. Trump and Melania have both been loud and aggressive critics of the FBI. Melania publicly blasted a previous search of Mar-a-Lago, calling it an invasion of her privacy and a warning to all Americans. Trump has spent years calling the FBI politically motivated, corrupt, and weaponized against him personally. So the dynamic right now is genuinely pointed. On one hand, FBI documents from the Epstein investigation are producing details that contradict Melania's public story and create a credibility problem for the First Lady at a moment when her husband is back in the Oval Office. On the other hand, she and Trump have argued consistently that the FBI operates as a corrupted and politically driven institution that cannot be trusted. You cannot simultaneously argue that FBI documents are politically motivated fabrications when they involve investigations of you and then expect people to simply move past FBI documents about someone in your social circle that produce information you do not like. The contradiction is real and visible, and it gives the story an additional layer of political bite that goes beyond the personal details. Let us lay out what is actually at stake here, because there are several distinct layers to the story, and it is worth being clear and specific about each one so the full weight of it lands properly. The first thing to understand is what this does to the carefully managed Trump family image and why that image matters so much as a political asset. The Trump brand has always been about more than policy positions or legislative achievements. It has been about a certain kind of power projection. Wealth, success, strength, a beautiful family, a love story that fits a very specific and emotionally resonant American mythology. Melania has been a central and carefully managed part of that brand from the beginning. She is poised. She is controlled. She projects a kind of effortless elegance that appeals strongly to a segment of Trump's base, who see her as a tangible symbol of his success and his taste and his status. And the origin story of how they met has always been woven into that package. The party, the connection, the romance that produced a marriage and eventually a return to the White House as the most powerful couple in the world. Now, that origin story has a federal document sitting inside it that says something meaningfully different. And even if that document ultimately turns out to be wrong, even if the Epstein assistant's account is inaccurate or unprovable, the damage to the clean, simple version of the story is already done in a way that cannot be fully undone. Because once people have seen the FBI-linked claim, once it has spread across social media and YouTube and political commentary channels and mainstream news coverage, the original version of the story can never fully reclaim its previous simplicity and innocence. There will always be a question mark attached to it. That question mark, sitting right at the center of the Trump love story, is something no PR operation and no legal threat can make disappear. The second layer here is the credibility problem that comes specifically from the pattern and scale of the responses. Because here's the thing about threatening enormous lawsuits and making rare, prepared public statements insisting that something is an absolute lie. It works as a communication strategy only if people believe you completely and without hesitation. And the more aggressive and outsized the response, the more it can read to outside observers as an overreaction that itself signals something worth paying attention to. Threatening someone for an astronomical sum of money is not the response of someone who is calmly and fully confident that the facts are completely on her side and that the story will naturally fall apart on its own. It is the response of someone who is genuinely frightened of what happens if the claim gets normalized and starts appearing in conversations and search results as an accepted part of the public record. And going on camera for a prepared statement, something Melania almost never does voluntarily, signals the same underlying anxiety. These responses feel like panic, and panic responses to allegations, even when those responses are technically and factually justified, tend to make the underlying allegations feel more important and more credible to casual observers rather than less. Which means every aggressive legal threat and every formal White House denial has to be weighed against the real possibility that it is extending the story's life rather than killing it. There is a version of this where the Trump side stays quiet and lets the story burn out in a week or two as the news cycle moves on. There is another version where the enormous lawsuit threat and the White House statement turn a story that might have faded into something that news organizations feel affirmatively obligated to keep covering because the subject herself is actively making news about it. The Trump side chose the aggressive path. Whether that was the right strategic call is something we will see play out. The third layer is the Epstein connection itself and why it keeps mattering politically and culturally. No matter how many times Trump world tries to create distance between the president's name and that one, Epstein is not just a tabloid figure from a different era. He is not just a rich guy who did bad things and got caught. He is a symbol in the public mind in an ongoing political and legal discourse of elite circles where powerful men did terrible things to vulnerable people and then used money and lawyers and connections to avoid accountability for decades. And the question of who knew what, who was in those circles, who was friendly with the people who ran them, who might have benefited from those networks in some way, is a question that has never been fully and satisfyingly answered. A significant portion of the American public believes that the powerful people with the most to lose from full transparency are still the ones working hardest to prevent it from happening. Every time an Epstein file release produces new details about anyone connected to Trump, every time a name comes up in a document that the Trump side then aggressively moves to discredit, it feeds that suspicion directly. It reinforces the narrative that there is more to be revealed, and that the people closest to the information are the ones most invested in keeping it buried. Now, to give the full and honest picture, Melania's denials on the specific core facts are clear and formally on the record. She has stated in no uncertain terms that she was never on Epstein's plane, never visited his island, and had no meaningful or ongoing relationship with him or his network. Those are specific and falsifiable claims, and there is currently no publicly available evidence that directly contradicts those specific factual assertions. The FBI document that contradicts her origin story is significant, but it is a single account from a single witness whose reliability has been challenged by her legal team. The emails with Maxwell are real and documentable, but their significance is genuinely debatable. Warm email closings between people who moved in overlapping social circles in early 2000s New York is not in itself evidence of a close personal friendship or of any awareness of criminal activity. And the broader point that Trump world has consistently made, that powerful people in New York encountered Epstein at social events without knowing anything about the crimes he was committing, is not inherently implausible or dishonest on its face. Epstein was careful and calculated about how he presented himself in legitimate social settings. Many people who later wanted nothing to do with him had genuine social interactions with him before his crimes became widely known. But here is what cannot be argued away, and this is the bottom line that matters most going forward. The story now exists in the public record in a way it simply did not before the file releases. The FBI linked document exists and is publicly accessible. The emails exist and have been widely reported. The legal threats and the White House statement exist and are themselves part of the story now. And all of that accumulated material is sitting there permanently, available to journalists, available to political opponents, available to documentary filmmakers and investigative podcasters and YouTube channels, and anyone else who wants to build a narrative around it for the next several years. The Trump side can win every individual legal fight and still lose the court of public opinion because the court of public opinion does not require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It runs on impressions and associations and the persistent feeling that something does not quite add up and that the people who should be explaining it are instead trying to suppress it. And right now, for a significant portion of the American public that was already deeply suspicious about what Trump world actually knew about Epstein, and when they knew it, these file releases have given that suspicion a new and very specific and very documented set of things to point to. That is the real and lasting damage. Not any single document taken alone, but the accumulation of details that keeps feeding a question that the Trump brand has never been able to fully and convincingly answer, and that shows no signs of going away on its own anytime soon. The fairy tale has a crack in it, and cracks like this do not get repaired. They only get wider.